Back in the late 1980s, under the famously gray skies of Seattle, Washington, something new was happening. In the gritty, isolated clubs of the Pacific Northwest, a sound was taking shape. It was a mashup of punk's raw energy and heavy metal's sludgy, distorted guitars. It was called grunge. This was a sound born from feeling alienated and angsty, a total rejection of anything glossy and mainstream. It was the music for Generation X, a generation that felt pretty invisible, and in bands like Soundgarden, Nirvana, and Alice in Chains, they finally found a voice. But the same raw honesty that made the music so powerful also came from a place of deep, real pain. And for some of its biggest names, that pain would turn out to be inescapable. Before Nirvana was a household name, before Seattle became the center of the music universe, there was a guy who was both a promise and a warning. His name was Andrew Wood, the wild, charismatic frontman of Mother Love Bone. By early 1990, his band was right on the cusp of releasing their huge debut album, Apple, and they were all set to be the first of the Seattle bands to really make it big. The album was originally planned for a March 1990 release, but just before it was supposed to come out, Wood died of a heroin overdose at just 24 years old. He was found by his girlfriend and passed away in a hospital after 3 days on life support. The album's release was postponed until July of that year. His death was the first tremor of an earthquake that would eventually shake a whole generation of rock music. A tragic first chapter in a story that would repeat itself over and over again. Section 1. The Promise and the Pain. Andrew Wood's death sent a shockwave through Seattle's tight-knit music community. Nobody felt it harder than his friend and roommate, Chris Cornell, the incredible singer for Soundgarden. Completely devastated, Cornell did what he did best. He poured his grief into his music, writing, "Say Hello to Heaven," and "Reach Down" as a tribute. He took these songs to Wood's former bandmates, Stone Gossard and Jeff Ament, and together with Soundgarden's drummer, Matt Cameron, and a couple of new guys named Mike McCready and Eddie Vedder, they formed a one-off tribute project. They called it Temple of the Dog, a name from a Mother Love Bone lyric. The album they made was a raw, emotional outpouring of grief and friendship. It was a beautiful memorial that also became the launching pad for what would become Pearl Jam. For Chris Cornell, it was the death of the innocence of the scene. Something beautiful was created out of tragedy, but it also cemented a dark link between the music and the heroin epidemic that was quietly taking over Seattle. This was the world that was about to be thrown into the global spotlight. Grunge was a scene built on a DIY, anti-corporate attitude. These weren't your typical rock stars. They wore flannel and clothes from thrift stores, and their songs were about depression and feeling like an outsider, not parties and fast cars. They were, as they said themselves, reluctant spokesmen for a generation that never asked for one. And then, September 24th, 1991 happened. That was the day Nirvana released their second album, Nevermind. The record label hoped it might sell about 250,000 copies. Instead, thanks to the explosive anthem Smells Like Teen Spirit, it was selling 300,000 copies a week. By January 1992, it had kicked Michael Jackson's album Dangerous out of the #1 spot on the Billboard charts. The floodgates didn't just open, they were blown completely off their hinges. The Seattle sound was suddenly the biggest thing on the planet. Flannel shirts became high fashion, and record execs were scrambling to the Pacific Northwest to find the next big thing. For the bands in the middle of it all, the success was completely disorienting and, in a lot of ways, terrifying. They had built their identity on rejecting the mainstream, and now they were its hottest commodity. This contradiction would define the era and put an unbearable amount of pressure on its brightest stars. Section 2. The Reckoning. The explosion of grunge brought a ton of fame, but it also put a magnifying glass on the personal demons that haunted its most famous figures. For Kurt Cobain, the pressure of being the voice of a generation was a crown he never wanted. He struggled with chronic stomach pain, depression, and a heroin addiction that just got worse as his fame grew. He was an anti-corporate artist who was suddenly on the cover of every magazine, a punk rocker who had become a pop culture icon. The contradiction was eating him alive. You can hear him trying to claw his way out from under all that weight in his music, especially on Nirvana's last studio album, In Utero. For Layne Staley, the singer of Alice in Chains, the darkness wasn't just in the lyrics. The band's 1992 album, Dirt, is a harrowing, brutally honest diary of addiction. For Staley, these weren't just themes for art. They were his life. As the band got more successful, his addiction got deeper, and his health started to decline. The death of his former fiancée, Demri Parrott, from a drug overdose in 1996, sent him into a deep depression, a spiral he would never pull out of. The breaking point for the whole scene came on April 5, 1994. On that day, Kurt Cobain died by suicide in his Seattle home. He was 27 years old. His body was found 3 days later. The news hit the world like a tidal wave. Vigils were held everywhere as fans mourned not just a musician, but a voice that truly spoke for them. Cobain's death was the moment the music's mainstream era symbolically ended. The party was officially over. What came next was the slow, brutal fallout. For Layne Staley, Cobain's death felt like a dark preview of his own future. He basically disappeared from public life, becoming a recluse in his Seattle condo. His last performance with Alice in Chains was in 1996. In the years that followed, his health got dramatically worse. He lost his teeth, his weight dropped, and he almost never left his apartment. Friends and bandmates tried to help, but Staley had completely isolated himself. On April 19, 2002, police were called to his condo after his mother said she hadn't heard from him in about 2 weeks. They found his body on the couch. Staley, who was 6 feet tall, weighed only 86 pounds. The medical examiner figured he had been dead for 2 weeks, dying from an overdose of heroin and cocaine. His estimated date of death was April 5th, the exact same day Kurt Cobain had died, 8 years earlier. Section 3. The Long Aftermath. Of the scene's original titans, one voice seemed to carry on. Chris Cornell had been there from the start. He mourned Andrew Wood, stood on stage with the guys from Pearl Jam before they were Pearl Jam, and led Soundgarden to become one of the biggest bands in the world. He was the survivor, the one who navigated the dangerous waters of fame and addiction and made it to the other side. He went on to form the successful band Audioslave and had a celebrated solo career. But being a survivor came with its own heavy price. Cornell carried the weight of his lost friends for decades. He was open about his lifelong battle with depression and addiction, which had started long before anyone had ever heard the word grunge. To the outside world, it looked like he had beaten his demons. He was sober, a family man, and still making incredible music. But the darkness never completely went away. On May 18, 2017, after playing a sold-out Soundgarden show in Detroit, Chris Cornell was found dead in his hotel room. His death was ruled a suicide. He was 52. The news was a gut punch, a final heartbreaking chapter in a story that was already filled with too much tragedy. The great survivor of the grunge era was gone. It was a brutal reminder that the pain he channeled into his art wasn't just a phase. It was a lifelong battle. The story of grunge is one of amazing art and devastating loss. It was a short, brilliant explosion that changed music forever, but it completely burned out its brightest stars along the way. So, what's the real legacy of this music? Is it the tragedy that defined it? Or is it the raw, honest, and powerful songs that are still with us? The music of Chris Cornell, Lane Staley, and Kurt Cobain lives on, a timeless testament to their incredible talent and their deep, inescapable pain. It's still a voice for anyone who feels alienated, misunderstood, or broken, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's a kind of beauty in turning pain into something you can scream out loud. What is the true legacy of this music? Let us know in the comments which of these artists had the biggest impact on you. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health or addiction, please know you're not alone. We'll leave some resources in the description below. Help is available.